The best way to start any musical evening is with this girl. It don't get better than this. Ella Fitzgerald is widely considered to be one of the greatest singers of all time, winning 13 Grammys and selling over 40 million albums.
And the winner is Fitzgerald and Pass.
The Queen of Jazz's sultry and instrument-like voice has inspired countless people. With such massive fame, it's honestly a little bit daunting to make a video deconstructing Ella Fitzgerald. She's already been the subject of plentiful studies, so what more can I bring to the table? Even if you're the biggest Ella fan out there, I've constructed this video to specifically shine a new spotlight on her vocal development and career progression and make you fall in love with Ella Fitzgerald even more. We'll start with a brief life summary and then move into vocal analysis. If you want to skip straight ahead to the vocal deep dive, click on the bookmark below. Born on April 25th, 1917, in Newport News, Virginia, Ella was the daughter of William and Temperance Fitzgerald. The couple separated a year after her birth, and Ella moved to Yonkers, New York with her mother and a Portuguese immigrant named Joseph. Though she was an introverted child, she worked as a runner for local gamblers, picking up their bets and dropping off money. Later in life, Ella described herself as a tomboy, as she often played baseball with the boys from her neighborhood. Yet she dreamed of becoming a dancer, frequently developing routines with friends to perform at local clubs. At home, she loved to sing her mother's recordings of Louis Armstrong, Bing Crosby, and the Boswell sisters. Later she said, "My mother brought home one of those Connie Boswell's records, and I fell in love with it. I tried so hard to sound just like her." In 1932, tragedy struck. Ella's mother perished in a car accident. Soon after, her stepfather suffered a fatal heart attack, and so at the age of 15, Ella and her sister Frances went to live with her aunt in Harlem. Unsurprisingly, Ella acted out. Her grades plummeted, and she frequently skipped school, and, as was common practice at the time, she was picked up by the police often. Eventually, she was sent to a brutal reform school upstate, where she received frequent beatings. When she escaped, she found herself homeless during the Great Depression. Just 2 years after losing her parents, Ella made her debut at the famed Apollo Theater in a raggedy dress and workman's boots. She performed 2 songs, "The Object of My Affection" and "Judy," her mother's favorite, in the style of Connie Boswell.
If her voice can bring every hope of spring, that's Judy, my Judy.
Interestingly, she had intended to perform a dance routine on a dare, but when she stepped up in front of the rowdy crowd, she froze. The MC, seeing her shaking knees, encouraged her to sing. She won first prize and the $25 award. Offstage, Ella was still the reserved and shy child. On stage, she found herself confident and comfortable. Looking back on that night, she said, "Once up there, I felt the acceptance and love from my audience. I knew I wanted to sing before people the rest of my life." Encouraged by enthusiastic supporters, Ella began entering and winning every talent show she could find. In 1935, she won the chance to perform with the Tiny Bradshaw Band at the Harlem Opera House. It was there that Ella met drummer and band leader Chick Webb. Though he had already hired a singer, Chick offered Ella the opportunity to test with his band when they played at a Yale University dance. "If the kids like her," Chick said, "she stays." She stayed and won the moniker the Queen of Swing. Ella made her first recording in 1938, "Love and Kisses," with Chick, and had her first hit with "A Tisket, a Tasket."
That itty bitty basket was the joy of mine. Tisket, I lost my yellow basket.
The album sold 1 million copies, hit #1, and stayed on the pop charts for 17 weeks. Ella was famous at 21. After Chick's death in 1939, Ella acted as bandleader until the group disbanded in 1942. Perhaps looking for solidarity after the heartbreaking loss, Ella had a brief marriage to a dock worker. Later, while on tour with Dizzy Gillespie's band, Ella, aged 30, fell in love with the bassist Ray Brown. They married and adopted Ella's sister's baby son as their own. It was through her new husband that Ella met producer and manager Norman Granz on the Jazz at the Philharmonic tour. Norman saw that Ella had what it took to be an international star and convinced her to join him at Verve Records. It was the beginning of a lifelong business friendship. In his biography, Norman stated, "I'd been thinking for years about taking over Ella's personal management, but Ella was afraid. She thought I was too much of a blow-top, so I told her it was a matter of pride with me that she still hadn't been recognized, economically at least, as the greatest singer of our time. I asked her to give me a year's trial, no commission, but she wound up insisting on paying the commission. We had no contract. Mutual love and respect was all the contract we needed." With Norman's encouragement, Ella joined the Philharmonic tour, where she worked with Louis Armstrong on several albums and began producing her famous songbook series. From 1956 until 1964, she recorded covers of other musicians' albums, including those by Cole Porter, Duke Ellington, the Gershwins, and more. The series was wildly popular, both with Ella's fans as well as the artists she covered. Speaking of her cover, Someone to Watch Over Me.
There's a saying old says that love is blind. Still we're often told, seek and ye shall find.
Ira Gershwin remarked, "I never knew how good our songs were until I heard Ella Fitzgerald sing them." Oh Lady Be Good by the Gershwins demonstrates Ella's fascination with the experiments of bebop rhythm and harmony from instrumentalists such as Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. The word bebop literally originated in one of her improvisational interludes. Ella often uses her voice to take on the role of another horn in the band. And throughout her career, Ella would master scat singing, turning it into a form of art. Ella was a workhorse, and she toured for 40 to 45 weeks per year. Fellow musicians spoke about her unbounded energy and enthusiasm. It was as if art alone sustained her. Eventually, this had to take a toll on her health, and she nearly collapsed on stage from fatigue in a concert in Munich in 1965. Ella suffered many health problems later in her life, from cataracts to diabetes, quite ironic for someone who nurtured no vices and had a deep commitment to work. In 1986, she underwent quintuple bypass surgery, which took Fitzgerald off the road for 9 months, her longest absence in 50 years. She finally agreed to a radical reduction of her appearances, often performing perched on a stool. Her last album was 1990's All That Jazz, which inspired her 13th Grammy. Finally, ongoing problems with diabetes led to the amputation of both legs in the fall of 1993. She rarely performed after that, and in June of 1996, Ella died in her home in Beverly Hills. Her death marks the passing of one of the most respected singers of all time. Bing Crosby said, "Man, woman, or child, Ella is the greatest of them all." Johnny Mathis said, "She was the best. She was the best there ever was. Amongst all of us who sing, she was the best." Doris Day recounts, "The one radio voice that I listened to above others belonged to Ella Fitzgerald. There was a quality to her voice that fascinated me, and I'd sing along with her, trying to catch the subtle ways she shaded her voice, the casual yet clean way she sang the words." And it isn't just Ella's voice that inspires, it's also her musicality. The great conductor Arthur Fiedler describes working with her. Ella's voice becomes the orchestra's richest and most versatile sound. And jazz singer, songwriter, and producer Cassandra Wilson simply states that Ella is the quintessential musician. If you have ever studied improvisation in music, you've almost certainly examined scatting, a jazz vocal stylization that uses nonsense syllables and creative, often spontaneous melodies. While Louis Armstrong is credited as the first to record scatting in 1926, Ella Fitzgerald became more associated with it. Even Ella described herself as the greatest vocal improviser in jazz history. She was musically and verbally inventive, and she combined playfulness and charm with sophistication and storytelling. When doing a vocal analysis and discussing what makes Ella great, we have to talk about her improvisation. However, there are tons of resources out there that dive into her scatting, and we know that she would often take her ideas from the horn section. There are also tons of studies out there analyzing her melodic choices, like the fact that Ella often had set riffs, meaning she'd essentially design a musical building block that would always appear in a song, and then she would improvise around that. But while Ella is best at improvising, that's something you can find out more about in other articles and videos. I want to focus on another aspect of her career that I think is equally impressive, yet vastly underappreciated: how she sustained wild success through a nearly 60-year-long career and effectively tackled vocal aging. If you want to learn more about her melodic or syllabic improvisational choices, check out the resources that I linked to in the About section of this video. It's rare for an artist to win a Grammy. It's even more rare for a vocalist to win a Grammy late in life. Ella Fitzgerald won her last Grammy for an album she made and released when she was 72. She started her first recordings before the Grammys even existed, but she still managed to win 13 total. For the rest of this video, we're going to go through her career chronologically, one stage at a time, and analyze how she developed her unique voice and then constantly refined her voice and vision until well beyond the age that most people retire. Ella's first credited recording was made in 1935 with the Chick Webb Orchestra called "I'll Chase the Blues Away."
I'll chase the blues away. I'll laugh and sing all day. I've found my lover, someone who'll be true.
There's an undeniable fresh youthfulness in this. It's bouncy and vivacious. It's also fairly straightforward. We don't hear her scat in this song. It doesn't have as much nuance in the enunciation or inflection. The vibrato is very minimal, and there is always a smile in the sound. Ella Fitzgerald began singing with almost flawless natural tonal placement. Her bass timbre is both clear and smooth, and it oozes charm, something that Ella will never lose. One of the first recordings that we start to hear Ella playing with scatting is in "You'll Have to Swing It, Mr. Paganini" from 1936.
At the final bar, we've greeted you with wild applause. But what a great ovation, your interpretation. Oh, Mr. Paganini.
You can hear a budding exploration, but it's more of an exclamation within a song rather than a whole story told through scatting. Ella's first big hit, as mentioned earlier, was "A Tisket, a Tasket," released in 1938.
Oh, why was I so careless with that basket of mine? That itty-bitty basket was a joy of mine.
There's a little more depth in her voice at this point, yet she also has simultaneously achieved more clarity. And we hear her starting to play a lot more with the inflection of the sound, scooping both into and out of words to emphasize her meaning. Her sound is like a rose that just started to bloom here, incredibly fresh, yet starting to have some sultry elements with that youthful vivaciousness. But we still don't have any elaborate improvisations. In the 1940s, bebop took off. Jazz became more complex. And Ella embraced this. It's during this period that we hear her improvisations emerge. When studies examine Ella's singing, they'll often look at scatting from this period as she achieved shocking excellence with many recordings like Flying Home, How High the Moon, and Oh Lady Be Good. Here's a sample from Flying Home in 1945. It's still super fresh and bouncy and vivacious, but it's way more complex. There are almost no words in this recording. Ella takes us on a journey throughout the whole song using nonsense words and syllables. One of my favorite passages of her scatting from this period is in the middle of a 1947 recording of How High the Moon.
High is the moon. Boo, boo, boo. Boo, dee, dee, doo, da, boo, boo. Boo, doo, doo. Doo, dee, dee, doo, dee, doo, boo. Boo, doo, down, 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 dee, boo, boo, boo. Bee, dee, doo, da, boo, boo, boo. Bo, bo, bee, ba, ba, bo, oh. Bee, da, ba, bee. Boo, lady, dee, da, ba, boo, bee. Dee, dee, doo, dee, 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 doo, 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 ba. Bee, bee, da, boo, ba, dee, boo, ba, ba, boo, ba, bee, ah. Baby, bum, baby, 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 oh, do dee doo da, boom, boom, bing, bang, bing, bang, 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 booty,
The chord progression underneath is already taking us on an increasingly more interesting journey, but the way that Ella orchestrates an overarching melody on top of those complex chords while filling in all the space between with pitch-perfect intricacy, it blows my mind. She almost sounds like a toddler exploring sounds before learning how to narrow the scope of vocal expression to create words that everyone else will understand. It's like Ella has discovered communication before language emerges, and that communication is singing in its purest form. Around this same time, Ella started recording with Louis Armstrong. He was 45 and she was just 29, and if you recall, she'd grown up admiring his music. This was a match made in heaven, and everyone knew it. They recorded many times together, often exchanging verses in a casual yet stylish setting that made it feel like they were having a natural, engaging, and highly entertaining conversation together.
I want the frame sauce with the awesome fade, with chihuahua on the side.
I don't want French fried potatoes, red ripe tomatoes. Believe me, I'm never satisfied. I want the fram sauce with the awesome fare, with your papa on the side.
In this recording, we hear Ella both sustaining long melodic lines while adding ornamentation, like little trills, on top. This demonstrates awesome vocal health and training. You need different muscle fibers for sustained notes versus agile ones, and Ella's combo without breaking up any musical phrasing is quite admirable. Add to that the vibrato that she has developed. We can hear her intentionally bringing that in at the end of some of those longer notes for expression, and the width of the vibrato has increased too, while still feeling nicely taut, and also maintaining a pleasantly rapid rate. These are all great signs of vocal aging. But despite the great vocal health, many singers at this point in Ella's career would have hit a roadblock and faded. She'd already reinvented herself once to adapt to the emergence of bebop, and she blew everyone away with her artistic development, so much so that we will always study her scatting from that period. However, bebop started to lose popularity at the end of the 40s. Ella had to reinvent herself again. But how could she stay at the top? Think about it. How many trilogies out there actually deliver greatness for all 3 books? Think about all of the TV shows that have a great first season or maybe a great second one, but lose it on the 3rd or 4th. Ella not only increased her capabilities once again with the new decade, she also launched into a set of recordings that many consider among her best from 1956 to 1964 with her famed songbook series. The first official songbook series album was Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Cole Porter Songbook, released in 1956. Here's Do I Love You from that album.
Do I love you? Do I? Doesn't one and one make two? Do I love you? Do I? Does July need a sky of blue? Would I miss you? Should go away.
I wouldn't have thought it possible listening to Ella's previous music, but somehow her voice has grown even clearer, and holy cow, her diction is drool-worthy. She took the freshness that she had early in her career and infused that into these famous songs, and she brought jazz styling, but also kept some of that classical elegance. And note, she still has that ever-present charm. Of course, the complexity of the scatting isn't as evident in these recordings. Remember that bebop had lost popularity, but Ella pivoted and still brought scatting into this new refined yet swinging sound, which you can hear in Blip Blip from her 1957 album, Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Duke Ellington Songbook. I love the way that her scatting has developed even more clarity. Her vowels are more precise, and her play with vibrato variation in both speed and width is increasingly exciting. I highly recommend listening to this and the recordings from the 40s to compare her improvisations a decade apart. Ella won her first career Grammys at the first Grammy Awards ceremony ever for Best Female Vocal Performance in Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Irving Berlin Songbook and Best Individual Jazz Vocal Performance in Ella Fitzgerald Sings the Duke Ellington Songbook. I'm obsessed with how extremely clear her diction is in Embraceable You from the Irving Berlin Songbook in 1959.
I love all the many charms about you. Above all, I want my arms about you.
Great diction in singing is about so much more than over-enunciating. It's about knowing what to project more or less in a word, what parts to sustain, and developing sensations to know how to sustain something in the same precise position. Ella strikes an incredible balance of having pristine enunciation without it feeling overly formal. She has a specific hybrid, casual, classy way of shaping her mouth around words. For example, a lot of the T's in Embraceable You are not exploded, meaning she doesn't sing about you, she sings about you, which is one way she softens her diction to be more casual. Still, you hear her practically juicing every moment of every word in this song. It's incredible how she can do that and sound so chill at the same time. On the flip side, one of my all-time favorite Ella examples surrounds a moment when the lyrics weren't so clear, at least not in Ella's memory. In the middle of a performance of Mack The Knife in Berlin in 1960, Ella drew a total blank, forgetting the words to the song.
Could it be, Mack The Knife? Oh, what's the next chorus to this song now? This is the one now. I don't know, but it was
love how a brain fart still couldn't stop Ella. She'd been performing regularly, and for so long at this point, it didn't seem to faze her. You can hear a smile in her tone throughout, and absolutely zero waver in the melodic line or pitch. Of course, being on the road so much is what led to her collapse from fatigue in 1965. With declining health, Ella needed to reinvent herself yet again. In the 70s and 80s, Ella Fitzgerald made a number of recordings and performed often with Joe Pass. This was ideal and super smart for her voice, as it was starting to wear. Don't get me wrong, she still sounds fantastic, as you can hear in this 1974 recording of Gee Baby, Ain't I Good to You?
What makes me treat you the way that I do? Gee, baby, ain't I good to you? There's nothing in this wide world too good for a boy that's good and true. Gee, baby, ain't I good to you?
Notice that Ella is sitting here. She started to sit more later in her career. She still has great vibrato control, even though it's starting to sound a little bit wider, which is a sign of vocal aging. There's also a little more smokiness in her timbre, which is still super clear. I love that she's added even more sass and elements of storytelling to her performance. Ella keeps her career invigorated by leaning ever more into that expression, so much so that she and Joe Pass won another Grammy in 1976. When voices start to age, things like agility and range start to diminish. While Ella's voice is starting to settle a little lower at this time, she still has a large range and tons of agility. Listen to this scat section from Honeysuckle Rose with Count Basie in 1979. Throughout the album, Ella and Basie, a perfect match. Ella is playful with rhythms, continues to nail the swung groove, and she also shows off her high notes still. She also has quite a bit of power and punch, which most voices would have lost at this age. Listen to the vivacity of Sweet Georgia Brown.
Not much. It's been such an awesome day when she lands in town. What a shame, what a shame. Ooh, how she cooled them down, fellers. She can't get it on, fellers. She ain't met Georgia, want you named her Georgia, want you claimed her. Sweet Georgia Brown.
The last album that Ella recorded was released in 1990, 3 years after she had quintuple bypass surgery. Despite being 72 when this was released, All That Jazz won yet another Grammy. How did Ella manage to pull off such an achievement when most singers wouldn't even be able to perform?
I'm in love with you and all that jazz. You're my dream come true and all that jazz. Baby, you're too much. You got the skin I love to touch. The skin I love to touch too much. And all that jazz. You have got the lips that suit my taste, and your fingertips can't be replaced. Oh baby, what you got, nobody has, and I've got you and that jazz.
Yes, her range is definitely sitting lower at this point, and her vibrato is wider and more difficult to control. There isn't as much power in the voice, so she often doesn't choose to sustain powerful moments like she used to. She makes other choices. The inflection, enunciation, and storytelling is immense. She utilizes her intimate understanding of jazz rhythm to highlight aspects that she might not be able to highlight with vocal fireworks anymore. She also relies on a lighter backing band, which is helpful. And the charm, that ever-present charm, has been added to with sass and mischief. She has so much charisma in her voice. I am still hanging on every word. If Ella hadn't had extreme health problems leading to the amputation of both legs in 1993, I think she would have made another album. She lived for art, and art sustained her in the same way that a lifelong caring relationship can sustain another person. Looking back across her career and observing how many times she faced challenges and reinvented herself is impressive. If you consider how many bands reinvent themselves and release new albums that ultimately alienate a large part of their fan base, and then you look at Ella again, you'll appreciate that not only did she reinvent herself, she also did it while maintaining and growing her audience appeal, and while also combating vocal aging later in life. If there's one song to listen to that represents Ella most, I'd choose her version of It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing. While this doesn't have her sweetest or clearest tone, it has the love of jazz and the energy and life she poured into her music.
Don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. It don't mean a thing, all you gotta do is sing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah. Makes no difference if it's sweet or hot.
Of course, the beauty of her songbook series is undeniable, and I highly recommend appreciating those at a leisurely pace. Or, if you find yourself a great student of jazz improvisation, check out Oh Lady Be Good.
Lady wants to be so good to me.
It's hard to go wrong with an Ella Fitzgerald recommendation, even with nearly 60 years of recordings to choose from. That's the mark of incredible creative resilience and career longevity that most artists will only ever dream of achieving.